but you came back and forth to India growing up. So tell us a little bit about your sort of Indian heritage and your Indian background.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and particularly to be in India. And as Sunil has said, my parents are Indian in Maharashtra, and growing up, I was coming back pretty regularly during the summer holidays. And I've always had a passion and a belief around the sort of intellect and the ability of Indian talent, obviously, clearly completely biased, and really have enjoyed coming back because of the richness and the tapestry and colour and sort of, just entrepreneurism as well.
I mean, there's a big gap for you. You came to India as a child, I imagine, see family. And then there was a bit of a gap as you built your family and you raised your children, and now you're sort of re-engaging with India. What are you seeing the differences between when you came here as a child and what you see in Ahmedabad or in India today?
Yeah, it's phenomenal, the transformation. I mean, I think globally that's also true, but not, nowhere so much as here in India. And for me, it's really, it's been several years since I've got back, actually over a decade. I've been very busy over in the UK and US and in continental Europe. And just, there's a lot of the good has been retained, but obviously in terms of the infrastructure, I was really impressed with Ahmedabad airport. The international and globalization and cosmopolitan nature of...
I'll give you a left field question here. As an Indian growing up in England, when I was younger, it's a very different environment to what it is today. So what do you feel about that? I mean, do you feel that as an Indian growing up in the UK that you have the same level of respect, the racism? How do you feel that's changed in the UK as well?
Yeah, no, and of course I have the female phenotype, which is a challenge. I don't see it as a challenge personally for all the women out there, but it can be perceived to be a challenge. And I think it's hard to differentiate which is due to some of my experiences, due to whether I'm a woman or whether because I'm very typical, Asian. But I think it is hard. It is hard for anyone that is in an ethnic minority or, but certainly very much so in the Western world, this diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI initiative has really taken off. I'd say in the last couple of years, there are, companies are trying very much to stop hiring in their mirror image. They're trying to bring on diversity of thought. They're trying to bring on new ideas, new ways of thinking. And I think diversity is really important. But that goes both ways as well. I think for the Indian ecosystem to thrive, I think there equally has to be diversity on this side. Can't just have it over in the UK and in America. And there needs to be that, real mix, eclectic mix of different ideas so that you can get the best of everyone's ingenuity.
I feel that in the UK that up till a few years ago, I think it has definitely changed. But you always felt like a foreigner in the UK, and you think, oh, when I come to India, it'll be like coming home. But then, we speak with an accent. We get treated a little bit, maybe not as a sort of a local Indian here. So you think I'm a foreigner in both countries, and you never sort of have that, belonging or that base. But I think that's now, since the Olympics, actually, since Boris had the London Olympics, there was a bit more of a accepting nature in the UK. I don't know, that's what I felt. But so moving on, you maybe you could tell us a little bit about your scientific background and where you studied and a little bit about your education.
Yeah, so...
Indians are always interested in education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So originally I was on track to become a medic. I was going to study medicine, but I didn't make the grades. And the reason being, actually, because I got a job and I loved working. And I realized very quickly that was actually what I enjoyed doing. So I unfortunately sacrificed some key exams. So instead I did biochemistry. So for all those scientists out there. But actually, I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I had, my university degree course was structured so that I was working.
Where did you go to university?
So I went to Brunel University, West London. And the reason I chose that was because it had industrial placements. So every 6 months I had the opportunity to work. So first 6 months I was working in a government lab. then back at university. Then the next 6 months I was working at Glaxo Group Research, as they were called in those days. And that's actually was a few years later my entry point into Glaxo. Third year I was over working in Basel in Switzerland for a company called Ciba-Geigy, who is the precursor of Novartis. So by the time I graduated, not only had I got my applied biochemistry degree, but I'd actually got big companies behind me with experience and then job offers at a time when the UK was really in difficulty in terms of none of my, my other school friends were getting jobs. So I think that made a big difference to me.
I mean, that sort of grounding in that sort of corporate environment is a great foundation, I think, for what you've done next. And some of those training programs as well for young graduates, I think that you must have really benefited from.
And that's where blue chip companies really excel, I have to say. Big Pharma, fantastic. All my GLP, GMP, GCP training, leadership courses. I was being sent on one residential course after another. Lean Sigma, you name it, accelerating change management. I was sent on every course. And the big companies, they do, once they identify you as, high potential or whatever label they decide, they will just invest in you. So I was very fortunate to be sponsored through my MBA at London Business School as a scientist to then have the business side through an MBA and then continue to have opportunities to travel globally. And that's something that you obviously get from big companies.
So you got identified early as someone with potential, and you worked through the GSK machinery in a way. And then what did you do after that?
So I did my thesis on intrapreneurship, so not entrepreneurship, but bringing corporate venturing, bringing innovation into big organizations. And I decided actually through conversations with some fantastic mentors that I had at the time, actually, it's all about, the journey really is developed with the interactions that you have with the people around you. That it would be great to have that opportunity and go and work in a biotech. So I then decided to leave the relative safety of Big Pharma and go and join the world of biotech. And I left, I had a corner office on a top floor of a building. I had my own PA outside. I had my own circular meeting table in my office. I had windows on both sides, and I arrived at this biotech, and they didn't even have a chair for me, let alone a laptop, let alone, it was a very small company, and they looked up and said, okay, so-and-so's off sick, you can go and sit over there. And I remember driving home, and I remember thinking, I think I've made a big mistake. And I got home, and I said, I'm not sure about this, because...
This interesting sort of dichotomy between Big Pharma and biotech. I mean, we hear and we see it a lot because we have in our portfolio, we have a lot of people that did work in AstraZeneca or GSK and or other, and then they come into the biotech space or even into o2h, and they feel free. It's like, they may not have the big window and the big desk and all the other trimmings that go along with being in a corporate, but they just suddenly feel they can express themselves. Did you feel, any of that when you joined your first biotech?
So I joined. I was immediately thinking this is a mistake, but I decided to give it a few weeks. And I thought, I'm not going to make any immediate decisions. And then literally, I think within a few things happened. I said something in a meeting, and the decision was made, and it was then executed upon and implemented before the end of the week. And for someone who had come out of big company where you have decision bodies and the bureaucracy, and it has to go through one senior vice president through another, that was absolutely transformational, and I loved it. And then the ability to affect change and impact, make an impact. And I didn't look back, but I have to say, in my experience, there are two types of individual. There are those who, even if you come out of Big Pharma, you can translate. But as I've been growing my biotech companies, I've come across individuals who haven't been able to make that transition effectively. And I think a number of executive search firms will also say that. I've had conversations with them. So you do get the great training. But there are two types of people, the ones who feel free and go, wow, now I can do whatever I want to, and I can really drive change and express myself. There are others who go, no, I like the governance, well, not the governance, not the biotech, but the safety net, and it's a different culture.
So I want to try to get to the vaccine stuff, which is going to be really interesting. But I want to talk a little bit more first about your PowderMed. It was your first biotech, and that was probably about 15 years ago, 16
It was about 18 years
18 years ago now, yeah. But, that actually exited for a significant sum. And that was the first company that's the first experience you had. And maybe you didn't have the experience of the full exit, but what is it that PowderMed did, and what was your sort of journey through that?
Yeah, so that was a vaccine technology which sold to Pfizer for several hundred million, and we were a very small company, and it was really exciting. And actually, coming out of Big Pharma, I was on the tech transfer team. So I went into Pfizer to help bridge the gap between biotech and big pharma, having worked on both sides of the fence.
So you've been in the vaccine space for quite a while.
Yeah.
You can see where this is heading.
Yeah. So I was able to tech transfer that in, and then I joined Pfizer as a vaccine project leader. Interestingly enough,
vaccines weren't sexy then, were they?
At that time, not so much. Although there was obviously avian flu, swine flu. There were concerns about a pandemic. BARDA, the US government, had got a number of grant calls out. There was a lot of funding, but people were still a little bit skeptical that there would ever really genuinely be a pandemic that would paralyze the world.
Boy, were they wrong.
15 years later.
Yeah.
We actually dug out some of the initial, the volumes and the books and the website links and all the materials that came through. And the CDC actually issued a set of materials at the time talking about how people might need to stay at home even if they felt well. And what's really interesting is if you do some really old research into this, there was uproar at the thought of anyone being stuck at home if they didn't show symptoms. And anyway, benefit of hindsight, eh?
So you were in PowderMed, I think, a few years?
Yeah. And then...
And were you straight into PsiOxus then, or did you something in between?
So I was at Pfizer and I was traveling quite a bit backwards and forwards to the US, and then I decided I wanted to go back into biotech.
Were you doing the Groton shuttle?
Yeah.
The Groton Sandwich shuttle. I did that for a while as well.
I was and into Connecticut as well.
Yeah.
So then I decided to go back into the world of biotech. So I was helping some small companies at the London Innovation Centre, and then I joined a company called Hybrid, and then I joined a company called PsiOxus.
I mean, PsiOxus, that was your real journey, really, a 14-year-old journey through the biotech, and you were there from the very beginning. I mean, I guess you were working with their founding academic team in the beginning.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you find that team? How did you even think that actually I want to get into biotech at that early stage of its whole life? That's quite a risky thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were a very small team, and the technology, it was a very complex arrangement. There were several scientific founders. There were several assets coming together. There was a merger of a couple of really, really small companies involving Imperial and Oxford University, and actually the University of Birmingham, and there was some cancer research work involved as well, Cancer Research Technologies UK. And we had to do grant funding. We had to go through...
So before you even did that, so what made you think, actually, I want to get into an absolute startup from ground zero? Did you feel that this is like a mission that I need to do, something I need to accomplish, give it a crack, give it a go? But what is it that kind of drove you into that very, very early stage?
Yeah, I think... So I knew some
of the... you mentioned to me earlier, she did mention that when I put my head into something, I just basically go for it.
Yeah. No, I do, and I tend to just absolutely, once I'm committed, I'm really absolutely passionate and driven. But I knew some of the individuals involved. I knew some of the technology basis as well, and it just seemed to come together as something that could be quite exciting to get involved in the space, and it was bridging sort of some of the principles of vaccine and immunology into the space of oncology. So pre-IO, actually, starting to build...
viruses, was it?
That's right, and bringing some of that. There was also some adjuvant technology.
Just quite exciting new technology.
It was very new, it was very exciting, and it was bringing together some of the vaccine principles into the field of oncology, which was also new. It was completely pre-checkpoint inhibitor.
And were you joining an existing team? I mean, there was founding scientists there, but were you joining a sort of existing management team? Did you have
so we were the management team. We were brought in to help the founders, and there were a very small group of us, and then eventually throughout the years we kept doubling in size, so 4 to 8 to 16.
So how did you get your first money? I mean, I'm assuming some seed capital.
Honestly, we were due to
so you had a grant. You said you had some grant funding.
We had some really small initial funding. We were going out to all the grant funding bodies. And then we started to get angels involved. And I vividly remember an afternoon just sat on the end of a phone in a hotel room, in the hotel lounge with John Beadle, who's the CEO at the time. And we were just calling so many people to try and get some money in order for us to see us through with this really important value inflection point that was upcoming. We got the money, we actually achieved the value inflection point.
But from memory, the time when you had to raise money is probably not a too dissimilar time today. It was a very hard biotech environment.
It was, yeah.
So you've been through this before.
Exactly. Lehman Brothers had gone down. Woolworths is a retail company in the UK, had just gone bankrupt. Investors who we had approached and had been interested were switching from biotech funds to real estate because prime property was becoming available in the city and in the town, high streets, because that's where Woolworths tended to be.
Most of the people here won't remember the market crash because it's quite a young audience. But that was a crazy time. And as she mentioned, the banking industry had pretty much collapsed. The housing market was on its knees. And so for risk, to try to raise money for a risky project, a scientific project, and ask for hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals to put their money into something where they probably just halve their public company portfolio it was a very challenging and difficult thing to do.
It was. And the other thing about fundraising is you've got to put the same amount of effort and due diligence and work in to raise 3 million, as 10 million, as 60 million, as 100 million. You still need a data room, you still need a disclosure letter, you still need to go through all of the reps and warrants, you've got to do all the legals. It is the same process. You don't cut corners. So it is that is one of the biggest changes, I think, between the UK and the US in particular. I can't comment on the Indian investment scene, but in the US, the seed financing tends to be a lot larger, which then frees up the management time to be able to really focus on driving the assets and the platform and the pipeline. I think one of the challenges in the UK, and I think it is improving, or it will improve, not at the moment because obviously the current macro economic landscape. One of the challenges in the UK is that the companies tend to raise much smaller Series A, and literally it's maybe 1.5, 2 years, and it's tranched, and by the time the money's come in, you've got maybe 6 months to start pushing the pipeline and the business plan forward, and then you're back on the cycle of raising money again. You don't have that 100 million sitting in the bank that you've got that longevity and that war chest ability to be able to try new things. Because the other part of course, as we all know, of success is you've got to take risk, and you've got to be prepared to fail. You've got to have that risk appetite of saying this might not work and pivot quickly. And if you don't have the funds to be able to be nimble around that can be particularly challenging.
That's a great point. That's absolutely a great point. You've got to be willing to fail, that's what she's saying. And also, if it's not working, you've got to switch it around, pivot, find that sort of fit. In science, obviously, it's not a market fit you're thinking at that time, but it's obviously a scientific fit. And be flexible around that. And you went through a number of roles in the company. You pretty much had every single role. I mean, you must have learned everything.
Not chief medical officer. I wasn't responsible for the medical side. Yes, so from operations, I was responsible for a whole clinical, quality, regulatory, through to project management, through to finance, business development. At different points, I had responsibility for different sections of the organization, culminating in I was the interim CEO, and then I became president last year. And
so I remember that PsiOxus had investment from Woodford. I don't know if anyone here will know the Woodford Fund, but Woodford is a major investor in the biotech sector in the UK, and then maybe you can mention what happened to Woodford. But he had a very large fund, invested in a lot of biotechs at the peak of the valuation, and then everyone started taking their money out because they realized that the market sort of maybe the companies he had invested in were not as good as their valuations reflected. I mean, do you want to expand on it? Because you lived through it. I mean, that must have been a difficult thing to do.
So the holding was quite small from our perspective, but there was that perception. And the other thing to note is that perception is someone else's reality. So it doesn't matter if the facts are not right. If someone has perceived that this is introducing risk, is an unknown variable. And, US investors in particular have a pattern recognition. They need to be able to understand the company quickly. They need to be able to understand the corporate governance and the shareholding. They need to be able to see their path to an exit fast. And they need to have this certain pattern recognition in terms of their checklist. And if you don't quite fit that mold, which sometimes you don't because your disruptive technology or your corporate governance is slightly different, or the shareholder structure, the cap table is different, then that can be challenging. So even though there's Woodford's impact on us, there were other companies where the Woodford investment was far bigger, and those companies have successfully...
How much did you raise in the end with PsiOxus?
So we raised 85 million in equity financing. We raised more in non-dilutive financing with licensing deals. I referred to one of our big deals with BMS, actually. We brought 50 million in as an upfront, and I mean that's a fun story in itself. We got the 50 million into the bank account that gave us a really nice and plus some milestone money immediately afterwards as well, because we achieved the milestones.
You'd have to say what the milestones were there.
IND, there was a preclinical asset.
The value.
15 million. There was sort of big tranches of money coming through, which was really nice.
You did those deals, I imagine.
Sorry?
I imagine you were very much involved in those licensing deals, collaborative deals.
So it was very much...
What's the structure of that deal? So a lot of people may... a licensing deal. How are the deals structured?
So it was a preclinical asset. We had a platform technology, and we basically had this concept of taking a viral vector and encoding it with specific transgenes of interest. BMS were really interested in the particular interaction with CD3 and CD80. So we were looking at, how it's a mirror image of a CAR T, if you like, but you're actually, creating a drug factory within the tumor cell and actually activating the immune system internally, as opposed to ex vivo manipulation, which is what cell therapy would be. So this was one preclinical asset, though. We had a multitude of other assets off our pipeline, and that one asset, we out-licensed it, and that brought in the 50 million. So out-licensing basically means we gave the rights to the pharmaceutical company, and they then said, well, you'll do the following activities. In our case, it was take it through the regulatory process, do the manufacturing, get it into clinic, or get it clinic ready, clinic enabled, and we'll then give you another milestone payment. So the deal was structured in different milestone tranches, and then you get the money for achieving those.
So during your journey in PsiOxus, you were seconded into the vaccine task force?
Yes, yeah. So that was...
So tell us about the vaccine task force.
Yeah.
Why was it set up, and who were the other members of that?
So obviously COVID hit. A real catalyst for change, actually, for lots of different levels. And I received a phone call. You'll recall that I was the vaccine project leader at Pfizer. I was also head of a vaccine portfolio at two other companies before that, and asked if I could get involved. And so I was seconded into Whitehall, which is the UK government, had to sign the Official Secrets Act, so I can't disclose too much. But I was a deputy director within Whitehall, and then an industry expert and a program lead. And the whole drive, the initiative was to find a vaccine for COVID as quickly as possible and get it deployed to the UK population, and then broader through the COVAX and other initiatives globally to ensure equitable distribution. That was actually quite important within the VTF, as we became known, within our mandate. We didn't just want to procure vaccines just for the UK population. We did want to ensure that we were accelerating.
The British government basically put together this vaccine task force, and they picked out the most talented people from the industry they could find to help them, develop the vaccine, but also to manufacture it, to procure all the vaccines, and Kate Bingham was very much involved in that. I imagine you had a lot of interactions with her and others. And they pulled out the greatest minds in our industry to really try to combat COVID with vaccine technology. And Priya was one of the members of this vaccine task force. And so it must have been an incredible time. And I remember it's like everyone just like dropped what they were doing, and it was the highest priority. We thought, as an industry, this is an area where we come into our zone now. We felt a duty, a responsibility as scientists, as business people within the sector, to do whatever we could to help. So, tell us about what your thoughts when you were asked to join the vaccine task force, and what you actually achieved and did during that.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a huge privilege, actually. It's something I'm super proud of, to be involved in the initiative. And when I joined, the task force was quite small, because I joined quite early on, actually. I can't remember what number I was, but it did grow, subsequently grow into a much bigger endeavor. And, you know, and it was, as Sunil says, bringing all of the industry experts, the agencies, the government. And government wasn't just funding, government was also trying to drive the collaboration. You know, we had academics from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, all of the academic institutions. I worked very closely, actually, with Oxford and Imperial at that time. So it was industry and the NHS. So the other part of this was we had this healthcare system that was plugged in, including the regulators and the ethics. And we were trying to say, how can we ensure no corners were cut, but how can we ensure integrity, fit for purpose, quality, but get a vaccine accelerated through? And obviously, it was about procuring vaccines, and there were a number of technologies that were being pursued at the time: mRNA, the PsiOxus vaccine, other types of technologies, more established traditional approaches as well. But it was also about having contingency plans and backup plans. So, you know, planning for success, but also having alternative innovations. We set up a vaccine registry to encourage, UK citizens to sign up to clinical research. We also initiated the first worldwide human challenge program, which was about, deliberately infecting volunteers with COVID, so that we could actually then monitor it 24/7. So we could look at, immunity and response rates, and would be able to fast-track vaccines, next generation of vaccines if needed. We obviously didn't know what was happening with the variants of concern at the time. There's a lot of factors, and you've already touched upon the manufacturing. The BIA, the Bioindustry Association, was very heavily involved. And I think it was a fantastic... For those of us who were involved, it was an incredible experience. Nobody was going anywhere, because you couldn't really leave the house unless you were going for your 1 hour of exercise a day. So you could get the top scientists in the country on a call at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, because you knew where everyone was. There was no travel schedules. Half the time it was just trying to work out who needed to be on the call. But it was incredible. And having the opportunity to present to the WHO and some of the other committees that I did, I felt really, really quite honoured to do so.
Is there any questions from the audience on that? Or I can come back to it in a second. I was going to say, that's obviously a great experience to have gone through. What next for Priya? Yeah,
so I'm here in India, and I'm talking to a number of people across the country in different cities. In terms of, I really do believe that this intersection of biology, chemistry, maths, computer science, these are traditional disciplines that India and India's talented workforce, particularly with English being such a strong language, really does put India in the forefront position. And I think was mentioned earlier, the geopolitical landscape means that there are funds to invest, and when the US and UK and other countries are looking to invest, and the VCs are looking to invest, and the banks looking to invest, they look to Asia Pacific, and China was always a strong contender, and perhaps that's now is the opportunity for India. For lots of reasons. And I think the real innovation will come from the multidisciplinary intersection of those core disciplines. So the AI, machine learning, data, mining, blockchain, bringing all of these novel technologies together and really pushing the boundaries. I think just touch the surface on it. And we see the transformation in fintech, and I think biotech is also, starting to experience that. So I'm really excited about understanding where those new technologies are going to come through, how India may be able to contribute on a global level. I was involved in raising some funds from the US, from some US investors quite recently, bringing some money, several tens of millions, into a biotech back at the end of 2021, just pre the change in landscape. But it was already starting. There was already a we need new technologies. There's been a lot of talk of mRNA vaccines, a lot of talk around gene editing, a lot of talk around cell therapy. And there are some great deals still to be done. But it's also now the mind turning to, well, how does immunology, how can our understanding help us now in the space of neurodegeneration? bit like I said earlier around vaccine understanding helping us in the field of oncology, or virology helping us in the field of oncology, pre-immuno-oncology. Well, now, of course, trying to look at what the next big thing can be, and that's what I'm really interested in looking at the moment.
Priya, I could sit here and talk to you all day and just chat like this, and I'm sure people are fascinated by your stories, especially your experience in the vaccine task force. I mean, you've done amazing things in your career. I still think there's one more chapter to be written for you, and I'm looking forward to see what you do next. I have a few companies in mind where we may have something in that space. But you're a great female role model, a female Indian role model, quite inspirational, and we really wish you well in the next thing that you do, and we'll be looking out to bring you back onto the Innovation Conference to complete Chapter 3.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.